From Ashley Barty leaving tennis right after winning the Australian Open, to Bjorn Borg surprising everyone with his decision to quit, here are the most shocking early retirements in tennis history. I've got to start with Ashley Barty's exit, which was a sports-altering decision. Fresh off her Australian Open win in Melbourne in 2022, Barty did something that no one saw coming. She retired on the spot. What no one could believe was how far ahead she was compared to the rest of the competition. No one on the WTA Tour had any response to her domination. I mean, she was the world #1 and only 25, and had spent 119 weeks at the top spot, not to mention, she was also the biggest hope for Australia in terms of tennis, having become the first homegrown Australian Open champion in 44 years. She'd already taken a retirement early in her career, and had returned after a short stint playing professional cricket. Is there anything that she can't do? Barty found her way back to professional tennis, and this time, she wasn't going to just make up the numbers on the tour, she was going to take over. That's exactly what the young Australian did, winning 15 singles titles and 12 doubles titles, including 3 majors. Having remained at the top of the WTA rankings for more than 2 years, Barty was supposed to headline women's tennis for decades to come. But her decision to leave it all behind changed the sport forever. The WTA had to find a new superstar to take over, because clearly, the best female tennis player in the world was sitting at home. A similar shock for the tennis community came back in 2013, when Marion Bartoli called time on her career after winning Wimbledon. Unlike Barty, Bartoli wasn't the biggest name in tennis back in 2013, but she was also no pushover either. The Frenchwoman was one of the most impressive players on tour during the late 2000s, having reached her highest ranking in early 2012 when she made it to the top 7. Bartoli had a number of deep runs in all of the majors, losing in the quarterfinals of the Australian Open in 2009, before putting together her best run at the French Open in 2011 in front of the home crowd. Many analysts believe that because of her near misses in majors, all she needed was one win for the floodgates to open. And in 2013, her luck finally worked. Despite being the 15th seed ahead of the Wimbledon Championships, Bartoli had looked like she was in good touch and caught a couple of lucky breaks as a number of higher seeds fell around her. There, she faced her first-seeded opponent in Sloane Stephens, who couldn't handle the smoke, as Bartoli battled through without dropping a set to the final. She was set to take on Sabine Lisicki, the German national, who just dropped Agnieszka Radwanska, the highest-seeded remaining player in the semifinals. Bartoli wiped the floor with Lisicki, losing only 5 games for the W. The world was still recovering from her fireworks, when only 40 days later, after the biggest win of her career, she announced an early retirement due to nagging injuries. Something similar happened to Robin Soderling, the Swede anomaly. He never had the honor of winning a Grand Slam major, but that mostly had to do with the tough demands of the men's tour, rather than his skill level. After all, Soderling did something that many greats, including Roger Federer, couldn't do, which was to defeat Rafael Nadal at the French Open. He became the first player to do so, and one of only 2, even though Rafa took his revenge a year later. Like Bartoli, though, many believed that he only needed one major for more to follow, and given his immense talent, it wasn't exactly an unpopular opinion. Soderling reached a career-high ranking of number 4, and made it to back-to-back French Open finals, losing only to 2 of the greatest players to play the sport, Federer and Nadal. Aged only 26, Soderling walked away, citing health issues. He'd been battling glandular fever for 4 years, so it wasn't exactly a shock when he retired. Fans were left devastated, though, because Soderling's talent was there for everyone to see. Another star who came so awfully close to winning the French Open, Guillermo Coria, suffered the same fate. Known mostly for throwing away a 2-set lead in the 2004 French Open final, Coria should be remembered for a lot more. He was a top 3 player in the game, and again, if not for the greatest 2 players of all time taking over, the Argentinian would have achieved so much more. Winning 9 career titles, Coria shockingly retired from sport at only 27 years of age in 2009. To be fair, it wasn't a bad idea to do so. On top of Fadal, a young Novak Djokovic was emerging around that time too, and the playing field had become more competitive than ever before in tennis history. That's what forced another former major champion to realize that he wasn't good enough, as Andy Roddick followed in Coria's footsteps 3 years later in 2012. Roddick had his own way of playing the sport, but he was always known as someone who'd give it his all whenever he played. So fans around the globe couldn't believe what happened when Roddick announced that the 2012 US Open would be his final tournament. Many believed that Roddick was still good enough to remain competitive for years, but having been a former major champion and a number one, it quickly became apparent that he didn't just want to play, he wanted to win. And if he couldn't be as successful as he once was, it was the right time to end his career. Juan Martín del Potro delivered the final blow in the fourth round, and Roddick said his goodbyes in front of the home support at Flushing Meadows. Talking about players who lost their final career games to Del Potro, Marat Safin was another former number one who left the tennis world speechless with his early retirement. Safin just wasn't a serious player. He was more committed to the sport than the likes of Nick Kyrgios and co. But the Russian enjoyed his party life a lot more than he enjoyed tennis. Otherwise, with the talent that he possessed, he could have won so much more than he did. Safin made his mind up in late 2009 and decided to end his career after a loss at the US Open at the hands of the career killer Del Potro. On the topic of what could have been players, you can't possibly forget Justine Henin. In fact, Henin's story is eerily like Barty's. She was also only 25, ranked number one in the world, but had a more successful career, winning 7 Grand Slam titles before finally calling it a day ahead of the French Open in 2008. Henin was even considered a big favorite for the upcoming major too. Unfortunately, due to injuries, the Belgian announced that she was retiring aged only 25. In fact, very much like Barty, Henin also made a return, coming back to the tour only a year later. This time, though, her elbow gave up on her and forced her to stop playing early in 2011. Fans often think about what could have been, because the first time Henin retired, she was right at the top of her game. And you often wonder if Serena Williams would have ended up with as many majors as she did, if not for Henin's surprising decision. Talking about slam champions who made comebacks after retiring, you can't forget another Belgian, Kim Clijsters. And Kim, unlike her Belgian counterpart, made one of the most successful comebacks ever. She'd already won a US Open and topped the rankings after retiring at 23 years of age in 2007. But Clijsters returned in 2009 and won the first major she participated in, the US Open, becoming the first unseeded woman to win it in Flushing Meadows. She'd win 2 more majors, one each in 2010 and 2011, before quitting the spot again in 2012, age 28. That still wasn't it for her tennis adventures, though. Can you believe the 3-time US Open champion made another comeback 7 years later? Yeah, and if not for her comeback coinciding with the pandemic, Clijsters could have actually had more success too. That said, a player who should have stuck around for a lot more success was Bjorn Borg. Talking about the unlikeliest retirements in sporting history, there's only one name that comes on top, and that's Bjorn Borg. Many of the tennis players on this list were on top of their game, but no one else was as dominant as Borg, who won 11 Grand Slams up until the age of 26. And given his quality, it wouldn't have surprised anyone had he won at least 20. The most surprising bit was the lack of reason, as Borg quit without any explanation whatsoever. He returned nearly a decade later, but was nothing more than a shadow of his former self. To think, Borg still considered one of the greatest players of all time, and he easily could have been so much more. So, from Borg's unexpected decision to end his career, to Ash Barty quitting the sport right after her Australian Open triumph, these were the most shocking early retirements in tennis history.